Good morning and welcome back to Margin. This morning I want to talk to you about the purpose of margin. I've broken this out into two parts, and this morning I want to talk to you about part one of why it is so important to build margin and focus in on building margin into your life. So let's jump right into it. So margin is defined by Webster as the spare amount or measure or degree allowed for contingencies or special situations. So what that means is that's the space outside the chaos. And in a world that we operate in right now that seems so chaotic, I think it's hard for people to realize, what does that even mean? Like, how do I even gain margin in my life when I'm burnt out, when I'm worn out, when I'm redlining it, and I'm emotionally and physically exhausted from everything going on in the world, and even more closely in my world. And so oftentimes people are looking at it through that vantage point, not realizing the fact that they have to take action in order to build that margin. So we live in one of the wealthiest times in history, and we live in one of the wealthiest nations in modern history, with our population of 331 million people who in large part don't represent that status. But why is that the case? Why is it that if we are living in one of the wealthiest times and in one of the wealthiest nations in history, why are so many people living completely marginless? So I believe this lack of margin has been further exacerbated by social media, by social norms, by the fact that we are supposed to look really good on the surface and show people our highlights, show people our mountaintop experiences, and not show people, the grave situation that I believe that most Americans are in today. And what this, I think, goes back to even more historically than social media is the fact that growing up, you're very much so taught to figure it out on your own. You may have had a humanities course or a home ec that touched on the topic, but for the most part, most people don't necessarily have that financial footing, don't necessarily have that foundation of understanding how money flows in an economy. And so therefore, when it has to do with their own personal finances, they struggle. They struggle through figuring out how much to save, how much to spend, and how much to give, and so on and so forth. And those are the types of topics I want to go through to help you build that sure foundation, that sure footing, so that you are better prepared to be able to make the financial decisions that you need to make in your life. So nearly 80% of our population are living paycheck to paycheck. That is 265 million people when you look at our population that are living paycheck to paycheck. That means hand to mouth. They are living in order to wait for that next paycheck so that they can pay their bills. And so there's no surprise with 80% of the population living paycheck to paycheck that our savings rate is what it is. And our savings rate hit a low in 2005 of 2.2%. And, when you're looking at it, you're like, okay, well, people are saving 2% of their annual salaries for emergencies or for future, a future retirement or something like that. And you're like, okay, but we went through the Great Recession, so that probably fixed it. But even January of 2020, savings rates were only at 7.6%. And so we've become maybe better at savings, at saving for the future, but not by a whole lot. And although we've gone through this tumultuous year and it seems like savings rates have skyrocketed during this time, I really do think they will level back out once there's less panic and less, concern over the future of our economy and whatnot. And so with that, I think that's something that needs to set in is the fact that the majority of people are living paycheck to paycheck, and therefore the savings rate's really low. So what does that end up causing for society? So when you dig down into the numbers a little bit further, you realize, okay, well, first and foremost, people are living paycheck to paycheck. Second of all, people are not saving at a rate that would enable them to have a good emergency fund in place. Okay, but what about if an emergency did happen? And when you dig down into the numbers and you look at it from the standpoint of, okay, if somebody ended up having an emergency, like $1,000 emergency, something like a refrigerator going out in their home, would they be able to cover that expense without going into debt? And 60% of Americans would not be able to. They would not be able to cover that $1,000 refrigerator without going into debt. Might I add, that's 199 million people who couldn't cover that refrigerator expense without going into debt. And when you drill down even further at a $400 emergency, I mean, you're looking at a set of tires for a vehicle. 44% of people would not be able to cover that $400 expense of buying tires without going into debt. Again, that's 146 million people that would not be able to purchase those tires without putting it on credit. That's an issue. So with over a third of the population experiencing a setback or an emergency of this caliber in a 1-year period, you can see that that's a scary stat, especially in a year where we've experienced a high level of unemployment due to people being laid off, or furloughs where people weren't being paid for a period of time until their companies reopened, or health-related expenses. But what you saw is a culmination of a number of issues even in this last year, and that 1/3 figure is based on a normal year. This has not been a normal year. And so what you end up finding is the fact that there ends up being a compound effect, and this compound effect causes people that couldn't afford that $400 set of tires before without going into debt are now going into debt to get those tires, and that interest is compounding against them in the sense that those $400 tires are getting more and more out of reach because of interest that they're being charged for having those tires sit on credit. And you've heard the saying that you can't climb out of a hole by digging, and that's exactly what people are trying to do. And that's what we're running into today is that many people are saying, okay, well, I have this credit card, or I have this payday loan, or I have, some kind of debt, some kind of obligation that is at this higher percentage. So I'm going to enact a bailout plan for myself. I'm going to refinance my car. I'm going to go get a home equity line of credit, or get a cash advance on a credit card at a lower interest rate. And what you're finding is people are basically taking advantage of these opportunities to extend credit on the lower percentage items that they have, like a home or a vehicle, and they're paying off historic debts like a set of tires that are historically going to be at a higher interest rate. So if this information is helpful to you, please do like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so that you're reminded of these episodes as they become available, and so that you can build in this routine into your daily routine to build margin over time in your own life.